June 1946, New York City. For 3 days, bodies surfaced in the Harlem River. Not all at once, not in the same place, not with any explanation the police were willing to give. One on Thursday morning, 2 on Friday, another by Saturday night. 5 white men in total, pulled from the water between 125th and 155th Street. Each one had been beaten beyond recognition. Each one had suffered injuries no street fight could explain. And pinned to the chest of everybody was the same handwritten note. Ruby Williams, 18 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. You murdered her. This is justice. Harlem remembers. The police called it gang violence. They always do when the truth is inconvenient. But Harlem knew better, because those 5 men weren't rivals. They weren't at war with each other. They weren't targets of chance. They were hunted. And the man who hunted them didn't hide, didn't run, didn't deny anything. His name was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. By the end of that week, every criminal in New York understood one thing clearly. The police had looked away. The courts had failed. And something far older and far more final had taken their place. This was not random violence. This was not chaos. This was a message. But to understand why the Harlem River ran red, why the NYPD quietly closed 5 homicide files without arrests, and why even the Italian mafia chose not to interfere, you have to start with the girl whose name the system tried to erase. Her name was Ruby Williams. She was 18 years old, and the moment the police decided her life didn't matter, they unknowingly signed 5 death warrants. Because in Harlem, when the law abandons its duty, justice doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. Before the bodies, before the river, before Bumpy Johnson made a phone call that terrified half of New York, there was a family that believed in the system, a father who worked honestly, a mother who sacrificed quietly, and a daughter who thought education could protect her. This is the story of how that belief was destroyed, and what happened when Harlem decided it would not forgive. Before Ruby Williams became a name on a police report, before her body was reduced to a line of typewritten indifference, she was a daughter. She was a routine. She was a future. Ruby Williams lived with her parents in a modest apartment on 135th Street, Harlem. Not a tenement, not a slum, just a small, clean place paid for by decades of honest work. Her father, Marcus Williams, had worked for the United States Postal Service for 22 years, never arrested, never late, never missed a shift. Her mother, Evelyn Williams, cleaned houses for wealthy white families downtown, 6 days a week, sometimes 7 when money was tight. They believed in rules. They believed in respectability. They believed, fatally, that the system rewarded those who followed it. And they raised Ruby to believe the same. Ruby was 18 years old in the spring of 1946. A recent graduate of Wadley High School, top 10 in her class. National Honor Society. Teachers described her as quiet but determined, the kind of student who stayed late to help others understand the lesson. She had been accepted to Howard University in Washington, D.C., a full scholarship, tuition, room, board, everything her parents could never have afforded, but had prayed for anyway. Ruby wanted to be a teacher, not somewhere else, not one day, in Harlem. She wanted to come back and teach children who looked like her, children the system already expected to fail. Every Sunday, Ruby attended Abyssinian Baptist Church with her family. She sang in the choir, sat 3 rows from the front, never missed a service. After church, she followed the same routine every week. She walked south down Lenox Avenue to the Harlem Library on 135th Street, returned books, checked out new ones, talked with librarians who adored her. It was a harmless routine, predictable. And that was the problem. On Sunday, June 3, 1946, Ruby left church just after 3 p.m. She wore a yellow summer dress her mother had sewn by hand, white shoes, her Bible tucked under her arm, 3 library books held against her chest. She never made it to the library. By nightfall, Marcus and Evelyn Williams were standing in a morgue, staring at their daughter's body while police officers asked them a question that would change everything. Was she involved in prostitution? That single sentence told them the truth, not about Ruby, but about how little her life was worth to the people sworn to protect it. By Tuesday morning, the police report would read, Negro female, approximately 18 years old. Evidence suggests prostitution-related incident. No suspects. Low priority. Case closed. But what the police didn't know, what they couldn't imagine, was that Ruby Williams was not invisible, and her death was not going to be ignored. Because somewhere in Harlem, at 2:38 a.m., a father stared at a loaded revolver and realized the law had already made its decision. And so he made a phone call, June 4th, 1946. 2:38 a.m., Harlem. Marcus Williams sat alone at his kitchen table, staring at a revolver he never wanted to own. A .38 Special, second-hand, bought from a Bronx pawn shop for $47. Money he didn't have, money he scraped together because grief had turned into something heavier. Resolve. The gun lay on the table between his hands like an accusation. His daughter was dead, 18 years old, murdered. Dumped like garbage in a railroad yard, and the police had already decided it didn't matter. They made him identify her body, asked questions without shame, closed the case without investigation. Marcus had done everything right in life, worked hard, paid taxes, stayed out of trouble, and the system repaid him by telling him his daughter was disposable. Behind him, in the bedroom, his wife Evelyn was crying, not sobbing anymore. She was past that. This was the kind of crying that comes when something inside you has permanently broken. She had been crying for 5 straight hours. Marcus hadn't tried to stop her. There are moments when comfort feels like an insult. Mark, her voice was barely audible. He turned. Evelyn stood in the doorway, hands shaking, her face unrecognizable under grief. Call him, she whispered. Marcus shook his head immediately. No, she stepped closer. Please. I'm not calling Bumpy Johnson, Marcus said. I haven't spoken to him in 10 years. He's a gangster. I'm not. The police don't care, Evelyn said, her voice cracking. The courts don't care. Nobody in this city cares that our daughter is dead. She collapsed against the doorframe, sliding down, sobbing again. They beat her, Mark. She couldn't finish the sentence. Marcus stood, crossed the room, and held her while she shook. I'll find them, he said quietly. I'll make them pay. Evelyn pulled back and looked him dead in the eyes. You'll die. The words were calm, certain. You'll take that gun, you'll die, and then I'll have lost both of you, and Ruby's killers will still be free. Marcus had no answer. Tell me, Evelyn whispered, what am I supposed to do after that? Silence filled the kitchen. Then she said it again, this time without hesitation. Call him. Marcus knew exactly who she meant. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the most feared man in Harlem, a criminal, a king without a crown, a man Marcus had sworn never to speak to again. But deep down, Marcus had always known something. That one day, something terrible would happen, something the law could not fix, and when that day came, there was only one man powerful enough to force justice into existence. Marcus walked to the phone with shaking hands. He dialed a number he had memorized years ago and prayed he would never need. The phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times, then a voice answered, deep, calm, unmistakable. Mark? Marcus broke. Bump, he whispered. They killed my Ruby. There was silence on the line. 5 seconds. 10. Long enough for Marcus to think the call had dropped. Then Bumpy Johnson spoke, quiet, controlled, colder than grief. I'm coming. The line went dead. Marcus slowly returned to the table. He unloaded the revolver, put the bullets into his pocket, placed the gun back into its box. He understood something now. He wasn't going to need it, because when Bumpy Johnson said he was coming, people died. And somewhere in New York, 5 men had just run out of time. 3:17 a.m., 135th Street, Harlem. There was no entourage, no bodyguards, no dramatic entrance. Just a single knock. Marcus opened the door immediately. He hadn't moved from the living room since making the call. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson stood in the hallway wearing a black suit, no hat, his face unreadable. He looked exactly the same as he had 10 years earlier. Older, heavier, but still carved from something unyielding. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Childhood friends, 2 paths, 2 outcomes. "Mark," Bumpy said. Marcus nodded. His voice wouldn't work. They embraced, briefly, awkwardly. Not like gangsters, not like heroes. Like 2 men who knew words were useless. Bumpy stepped inside. Evelyn was sitting on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she saw him, she stood. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Bumpy nodded once. "Tell me." They told him everything. How Ruby left church, how she never came home, how the police knocked on their door that night, how they stood in a morgue while officers speculated about their daughter's morality instead of her murder. Evelyn broke down when she described Ruby's body. Bumpy didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions, didn't show emotion. But Marcus noticed something. A tightening around his eyes, a stillness that meant something inside Bumpy had locked into place. When they finished, the apartment was silent. Finally, Bumpy spoke. "Do the police have suspects?" Marcus laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "They're not even looking. They called her a prostitute and closed the case." "No investigation?" "Nothing." Bumpy stood and walked to the window, looking out over Harlem's sleeping streets. "I need to know something," he said, "because what happens next can't be undone." He turned back to Marcus. "Are you prepared for the consequences?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Yes." Bumpy studied him. "This won't bring Ruby back." "I know. It's illegal. The law already failed her." Bumpy nodded slowly. "Then here's my promise." He looked directly at Evelyn. "I will find every man involved in your daughter's murder. I will make them understand what they did. And when I'm finished, everyone in this city will know there are consequences for touching Harlem's children." "How long?" Evelyn asked. 3 days, maybe 4. "And the men who killed her?" Bumpy's voice was flat. "They'll be in the Harlem River." Marcus closed his eyes. Evelyn stepped forward and took Bumpy's hand. "Make them suffer," she said. "Make them understand." Bumpy met her gaze. "I promise." At the door, he paused. "When is Ruby's funeral?" "Saturday, June 15th, Woodlawn Cemetery." "I'll be there." Then Bumpy Johnson walked back into the Harlem night. By 4 a.m., he was making phone calls. By sunrise, he would have names. By the end of the week, New York would pretend nothing happened, and Harlem would never forget. To understand what happened over the next 3 days, you have to understand one brutal truth. Ruby Williams was not the first. 8 months earlier, October 1945, East Harlem, a 16-year-old black girl named Dorothy Jenkins disappeared while walking home from her job at a laundry on 116th Street. 3 days later, her body was found inside an abandoned building near the East River. Beaten, silenced, discarded. The police investigation lasted less than 2 hours. The report labeled her a troubled girl involved in street work. No interviews, no suspects. Case closed. Dorothy's family was poor, powerless, and terrified. They buried their daughter quietly, while 5 men celebrated in a bar just a few blocks away. Because the men who killed Dorothy Jenkins had learned something dangerous. They learned the system would protect them. The crew was led by Tony Russo, 26 years old, an enforcer operating in East Harlem under the shadow of the Genovese crime family. Tony wasn't important. He wasn't made. He was muscle. He collected gambling debts, enforced territory, and did the ugly work higher-ups didn't want their names attached to. And Tony had a theory. One night, drunk and laughing at Carlos' bar, he said it out loud. "What if we grab one of them? What if we do whatever we want? Who's going to care?" The room went quiet. Then Tony finished the thought. "She disappears, cops say she was working the streets. Case closed. Even if we get picked up, what jury convicts 5 white guys over a dead black girl?" Nobody argued, because in 1945 New York, he was probably right. So they tested the theory. Dorothy Jenkins was the test. Nothing happened. No arrests, no investigation, no consequences. And for 8 months, they waited. When nobody came looking for revenge, when no one asked questions, when the city moved on, they got bold. By May 1946, Tony was talking again. "One more," he said, "just to prove it." That's when they noticed Ruby Williams. Every Sunday, same route, same time, a well-dressed black girl carrying books and a Bible, smart, young, invisible to the system. Sunday, June 3rd, 1946. Tony Russo and his crew decided to find out, one last time, whether anyone would care. They were about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives, because this time, they didn't just kill a girl. They woke up Harlem, Sunday, June 3rd, 1946, 3:17 p.m., Lenox Avenue, Harlem. The street was alive. Church had just ended. Families were heading home. Kids ran between adults. Vendors shouted. Music drifted from open windows. Ruby Williams walked alone, just as she always did. 3 library books tucked against her chest, her Bible resting on top, her yellow dress catching the sunlight. She never saw the car slow beside her. A black sedan, out of place but not suspicious enough to cause alarm. The door opened. 2 men stepped out. The grab took seconds, hands on her arms, a sudden pull. A scream cut short. Another man pressed a cloth to her face. Witnesses froze. They saw it. A dozen people at least. But this was Harlem in 1946. You didn't interfere when white men grabbed a black girl. You didn't call the police. You didn't testify, because the system didn't protect witnesses either. The car drove east. Gone. By nightfall, Ruby Williams was dead. At 8:47 p.m., a railroad worker found her body near the tracks in East Harlem and called the police. 2 officers arrived. They looked for less than 2 minutes. No canvas search. No evidence collection, no urgency. One officer wrote in his notebook while the other smoked. When the worker asked if they were going to investigate, the officer shrugged. "She's a colored girl. Probably prostitution." That sentence sealed everything. By Tuesday morning, the report was filed. Case closed. But at 2:38 a.m., a father made a phone call. And while the police slept, a different investigation had already begun. Because Bumpy Johnson didn't need warrants. He needed names. By Tuesday morning, Bumpy Johnson already knew where to look. East Harlem, Italian territory, Genovese shadows. Ruby had been taken in broad daylight and driven east. That meant the men who did it were operating comfortably in someone else's neighborhood. And in New York City, nothing like that happens without permission. Or protection. At 8:09 a.m., Bumpy sat in his office above Small's Paradise, Harlem's most famous nightclub. The music downstairs hadn't started yet, but the building already felt awake. Across from him sat Theodore Teddy Green, his lawyer, advisor, and the one man in Bumpy's circle who understood both the streets and the law. "I need to speak to Frank Costello," Bumpy said. Teddy paused. Costello wasn't just a mobster. He was the acting boss of the Genovese crime family, the most powerful organization in New York, while Vito Genovese hid overseas. Reaching out to Costello meant one thing. This was about to become official. "If Costello's people did this," Teddy said carefully, "you're stepping into something big." "If his people did this," Bumpy replied, "then he already stepped into something bigger." By Tuesday afternoon, the meeting was arranged. Wednesday, 10 a.m., a private social club in Little Italy. Bumpy walked past two armed guards and into a back room where Frank Costello sat reading the morning paper. Costello looked more like a banker than a killer. That was why he was dangerous. "Mr. Johnson," Costello said calmly, "Teddy says this is urgent." Bumpy didn't sit down slowly, didn't soften his words. Sunday afternoon, 5 men grabbed an 18-year-old black girl off a Harlem street. They took her to a warehouse in the Bronx, violated her, beat her to death, and dumped her body like trash. The police called her a prostitute and closed the case. Costello's expression didn't change. "And you're telling me this because the men who did it operate in your territory, and because this wasn't the first time." Costello listened. Then he made a phone call. 10 minutes later, he had names: Tony Russo, Paulie Scarlatti, Jimmy DiNardo, Vinnie Carbone, Franks. Russo, low-level enforcers, not made men, liabilities. Costello stood and walked to the window. "These men crossed a line," he said quietly, "and they did it in a way that brings heat I don't need." He turned back to Bumpy. "They are no longer under my protection." That was all Bumpy needed to hear. No war, no retaliation, no questions. By Wednesday night, Bumpy sat with 4 trusted men. 5 photographs lay on the table. 3 days, Bumpy said. Quiet, controlled, no civilians, no mistakes. "And the police?" one man asked. "They'll look away," Bumpy replied, "because to investigate what's coming means admitting what they ignored." Bumpy wrote a single note, one that would appear again and again. Ruby Williams, 18 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. By Thursday morning, the hunt had begun. And somewhere in New York, 5 men who thought they were untouchable were about to learn what it feels like to matter. Thursday night. New York was loud. Harlem was awake. Tony Russo left Carlos Bar just before midnight, drunk, careless, laughing with the confidence of a man who believed he'd beaten the system. 5 days had passed since Sunday. No police, no questions, no consequences. That was when he vanished. No witnesses came forward, no report was filed, and at 6:12 a.m. Friday morning, a dock worker near 145th Street saw something floating in the Harlem River. A body, white male, mid-20s, severe trauma. Pinned to the chest was a note written neatly, deliberately. "Ruby Williams, 18 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. You murdered her. This is justice. Harlem remembers." By noon, the NYPD had the name: Tony Russo, a low-level East Harlem enforcer, known to police, known to the streets. The case was immediately labeled gang-related. No press conference, no task force. Just a quiet understanding inside the precinct that something else was happening, and that no one wanted to be the man who pulled too hard on. The thread. Because by Friday night, another body surfaced, then another. Different locations, same river, same note, 3 men in less than 36 hours. Detectives noticed patterns they didn't write down, connections they didn't share with reporters. These men weren't rivals. They weren't fighting each other. They were being collected. By Saturday morning, the rumor was everywhere. Barbershops, church steps, street corners, Bumpy's cleaning house. "It's about that girl. The police ain't touching this." By Saturday night, only one man from Tony Russo's crew was still breathing, and he knew it, because by then, the river had made its point. Saturday, 9:43 p.m. A tenement near Pleasant Avenue, East Harlem. Frank Russo hadn't left his apartment in 2 days. The radio stayed on, loud enough to drown out his thoughts. The curtains never opened. The door stayed locked. He'd seen the bodies, Tony, Paulie, Jimmy, each one pulled from the river like a warning, each one carrying the same message. Frank knew the order. He was last. At 9:46 p.m., the knock came. Not loud, not violent. 3 calm taps. Frank froze. The knock came again. When he opened the door, He expected guns. There were none, just two men, well-dressed, quiet. One of them spoke. "Frank Russo." Frank's knees gave out. He didn't scream, didn't fight. He cried. They sat him down. They let him talk. And he talked. For 20 minutes, Frank confessed to everything. Dorothy Jenkins, Ruby Williams, the laughter, the confidence, the belief that nothing would happen. "I didn't touch her," he sobbed. "I swear, I was just there." One of the men wrote something down. When Frank finished, one of them stood. "You understand why this is happening?" Frank nodded desperately. "I'll go to the police," he said. "I'll confess. I'll testify. Please." The man shook his head. The police already decided these girls didn't matter. Frank collapsed. "Please," he whispered. "I got a mother." One of the men leaned close. So did Ruby. They took him out quietly. At 11:58 p.m., Frank Russo went into the Harlem River. On his chest, pinned carefully, Ruby Williams, 18 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. This is justice, Harlem remembers. By Sunday morning, there were no men left. Sunday morning came without sirens. No manhunt, no emergency meetings, no headlines demanding answers. 5 white men were dead, an entire crew erased, and the city moved on. The NYPD closed all 5 cases within a week. Cause of death, intergang violence, no suspects, no arrests, no follow-ups. To investigate would have required admitting something unforgivable. That an 18-year-old black girl had been kidnapped in broad daylight, that witnesses were ignored, that a murderer walked free until the streets corrected the record. So the city chose silence. Saturday afternoon, Woodlawn Cemetery, the church overflowed. Teachers, students, neighbors, strangers who never met Ruby but knew exactly why they were there. Bumpy Johnson stood in the back. No speech, no gestures, just a man in a dark suit, head bowed. When the casket lowered, a woman near the front whispered, "She mattered." And for the first time since Sunday, it was true. There was no official reform, no apology, no justice reform committee. But something shifted. Girls walked home in groups, men watched corners more closely. And for years after, there were no reported daylight kidnappings of black girls in Harlem. Not because the law had changed, but because the rules had. This is not a story about a hero. Bumpy Johnson was a criminal, a racketeer, a man who thrived in violence. But in a city that decided certain lives were disposable, he became something else. Not justice, consequences. Because when the system refuses to protect the innocent, someone else always steps in. And history remembers the result, not the paperwork. When last thing the police never wrote down. Every detective involved noticed the same detail. The notes. Same handwriting, same phrasing, same care. Those weren't threats. They were epitaphs. Harlem never asked for vengeance. It asked for protection. And when the law looked away, the river answered.